Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The coyotes are howling in the holler. The Christmas lights are twinkling. And it's Sunday night. That means it's View from the Bunker Live. Welcome, I'm Derek Gilbert. Coming up tonight, kind of an abbreviated session, talking about the news of the week. A tsunami in Indonesia. Getting out of Syria. Washington, DC explodes. Secretary of Defense Mattis out. And what can we expect from Islam in the new year? Oh, yes, and Merry Non-Pagan Christmas. That and more coming up tonight on A View from the Bunker Live. Our guests, what do Sunnis and Shias have in common? Well, maybe less than you think. Historian and Islam expert Dr. Timothy Furnish joins us in about 15 minutes. And a bonus guest, once again tonight, historian and archaeologist Dr. Judd Burton talks about the origins of Christmas. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Thank you for listening tonight, wherever you're finding us, whether it's Spreaker.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher.com, now Spotify.com, or, of course, the website, VFTB.net. The chat room open at Spreaker.com if you're inclined to log in and share your comments with us tonight. Subscribe to the podcast. If you're not listening live, if you're listening in the archives, subscribe. Make it easy to download these programs on a weekly basis. Do it automatically. You subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or directly at VFTB.net, where we've got links to all of those podcast subscription links. That notice from the Department of Redundancy Department. The mobile app is really the easiest way to do it. We've got a free mobile app for A View from the Bunker. You can download it at the iTunes App Store and at Google Play. And, of course, we've got links for both of those at VFTB.net, which is, of course, the official website with archives going all the way back to 2009. The audio version of the program will be uploaded to YouTube. So you can find it at my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Derek Gilbert. On social media, subscribe, give us a like, give us a review, wave, or whatever. Facebook.com/View from the Bunker. Twitter at View from Bunker. And you'll also find me at the new social media site, oneway.com/Derek P. Gilbert. Oneway.com/Derek P. Gilbert. Well, this weekend, this is almost shades of 2004 with a deadly tsunami hitting right around Christmas. Not nearly as devastating as the one back in 2004, but on Saturday night, the strait between the islands of Java and Sumatra in Indonesia, which is the location of the Krakatoa volcano, although this one is now called Anak Krakatoa or Child of Krakatoa, an underwater mudslide or rock slide caused by volcanic activity appears to have triggered a massive wave Saturday night because death toll now, as of this on Sunday evening, 222 people, about 850 people injured, some 24 are still missing. Again, the Sunda Strait between Java and Sumatra. This hit the coastline about 60 miles from the capital of Jakarta on the island of Java. The area worst hit is includes popular beaches and a national park. So at this time of year, travelers, vacationers taking advantage of the warm weather and beautiful ocean nearby, just a tragedy. And as we've reported previously about similar things in Indonesia, it is not an area where part of the world where the infrastructure is the greatest. So help to those affected is not going to come as quickly as it would here in the West. The wave, again, believed to have been caused by an undersea landslide from activity at Krakatoa. This volcano, Anak Krakatoa, Child of Krakatoa, replaced, it basically emerged or grew out of the caldera, the crater, left by the devastating explosion of the Krakatoa volcano back in was it 1888, I believe? Yeah, which was... that one was felt around the world pretty much. The ash that had kicked up into the air was detected pretty much worldwide. Here in the United States, not quite on the same level, at least for the people directly involved, but with global consequences nonetheless. The announcement earlier this week that President Trump was going to had ordered the Pentagon to pull U.S. troops from Syria immediately. Immediately. This was unexpected. On Monday of this week, I was reporting on a Washington Post article from last week, the previous week, that U.S. officials were saying American troops were going to stay in Syria indefinitely, that the U.S. was occupying everything east of the Euphrates River in Syria and would occupy it indefinitely. Well, the president put a stop to that and apparently did so during a telephone call with Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He was on the phone with President Erdogan of Turkey. And Erdogan, who is as much a deal maker as President Trump, pressed Trump. These are according to reports sourced by news outlets that claim they've got sources inside the White House. President Trump was asked by Erdogan why American soldiers were still in Syria if, in fact, the Islamic State was pretty much a non-player anymore. I mean, the Islamic State only holds about 1% of the territory that it once controlled inside Syria. A small little pocket along the Euphrates River near Deir ez-Zor, and that was getting pounded by American air power. President Trump asked National Security Advisor John Bolton, who was on the phone call, if it was true that the Islamic State only controlled 1% of its former territory. Mr. Bolton said, well, yes, Mr. President, that is in fact true. And President Trump said to President Erdogan, okay, we'll get our guys out. Well, that caught President Erdogan by surprise. I don't think he expected President Trump to give so quickly. Certainly caught John Bolton by surprise. Caught the Pentagon by surprise, caught the Washington establishment by surprise, caught the military-industrial complex by surprise, apparently. When you see a reaction like the one that has emerged from the Washington political class and the national punditry that we've seen this week, which is shock, astonishment, and howls of alarm that President Trump is throwing the last adult in the room under the bus, that this will destabilize the region, that we're abandoning our allies, the Kurds, which in a sense is true because the Turks don't like having the Kurds on their border. They do not want a Kurdish state on their border, and they consider the Kurdish militia, which has been really the only effective fighting force in that area against the Islamic State. They don't want the YPG, the Kurdish militia, which they consider the military arm of a terrorist organization, setting up a de facto independent state in Syria and Iraq right on its border. Okay, that said, when you see both parties, Republicans and Democrats, coming together to complain about something, you might assume that maybe they're in agreement on something because it's true, or you might conclude that they're in agreement on something because this is the deep state trying to prevent the president from doing something that actually makes a lot of sense but will cost them money or power or both. I mean, think about it. President Obama, and this was surprising. I mean, Lindsey Graham, who really stepped up and was a strong ally of President Trump during the confirmation hearings of Justice Brett Kavanaugh, Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, called the decision to withdraw from Syria an Obama-like mistake. Well, no, the Obama-like mistake was putting us into Syria in the first place. You might remember President Obama said again and again, there will be no American boots on the ground in Syria, which of course is only true if our soldiers there are wearing sneakers or high heels or something. We have got an estimated, officially it's only 503. The official number probably closer to 2,000, and when you actually add the numbers that we're not supposed to know about, is probably double that. But according to the president, they're supposed to be out and coming home shortly. This, of course, led to, well, what do I think about this? I think it's overdue because, frankly, we don't have any true national interest in Syria. I mean, yes, okay, countering the political influence of Iran in the region, I suppose, is a national interest. We certainly want to protect our ally, Israel. But being perfectly honest, our troops weren't invited into Syria by President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, who, whether you like him or not, is the duly elected leader of that nation. The Russians, however, were invited in, and keeping American soldiers in the region puts our soldiers in close proximity to soldiers representing the other major nuclear power on the planet. So it is not a good idea. Every time our Air Force or any of our air power from any one of our military branches, the military, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, flies missions over Syria, there is a possibility that they will confront the Russian Air Force, which again could turn this into a shooting war of a much greater size than the one that's already there. And at the end of the day, what national interest do we have from occupying this nation that did not invite us to invade? We, in fact, have invaded Syria. And even under the so-called authorization for the use of military force passed years ago by Congress, this really, really stretches the definition. And it is really, really difficult, without twisting the Constitution into knots, to find the justification in the Constitution for the president to continue to keep troops on the ground in Syria. Even friendly media outlets like Fox News, pundits there slamming the president for this decision to withdraw from Syria and to draw down our soldiers in Afghanistan, the forces that we have in Afghanistan. Again, no real interest in Afghanistan. I mean, no legitimate interest. There are real interests there. For example, I would note that the production of opium poppies is at record levels the last couple of years in Afghanistan. And this has been occurring and has been growing since we invaded back in 2001. While our soldiers are there, that has been continuing. So, there are interests there, but not legitimate national security interests. If we were really concerned about the growing influence of Iran in the Middle East, we should never have taken Saddam Hussein out of the equation back in 2003. Again, a guy that you would not want anywhere near your family. You certainly wouldn't sit down and have a friendly meal with him. But that's how that part of the world has been governed for 6,000 years. And Saddam Hussein, representing the Sunni minority in Iraq, was the bulwark against the growing Shia power in the region, Iran. We took him out and we created Iran's new best friend. And what's going on there? Critics are pointing a finger at President Trump and saying withdrawing our forces will lead to a revival of the Islamic State. ISIS will return. No, you know what's happening? The Shia majority in Baghdad, in sending its troops out into the Sunni provinces, are essentially getting payback against the Sunnis who live there, assuming that because they didn't run away when the Islamic State occupied their areas, that they were collaborators. What's happening is that the Islamic State may return because the Sunnis, who are now catching hell, frankly, from the Shia-dominated government in Baghdad, see the Islamic State as their only real protection from the government in Baghdad. Again, if we hadn't wanted to create that problem, we should never have taken out Saddam Hussein. So that's what's going on. It's difficult for us in the West to figure out what goes on, how to fix the problem in the Middle East, because we don't really understand Islam. And that's why we've lined up our guest for tonight. I hope that we're on the same page regarding time zones, because I'm not certain that we are. We shall find out shortly. But at very least, I've got some audio from our guest from a previous interview. If we need to, we can bring it back because it's worth hearing again. Dr. Timothy Furnish, an expert in Islamic eschatology, joins us as A View from the Bunker continues next. I'm Derek Gilbert.
We've been told that America is a Christian country from its origin, one nation under God. We've been taught that our government is for the people, by the people. But what if it's all been just a grand deception? What if the God, worshipped in secret by government leaders in our nation's capital, is in fact our enemy? And many of our leaders have been venerating him secretly through arcane rituals, setting the scene for the incarnation of this ancient entity.
They used the powerful energy of ninth-degree sex magic, through which the goddess Babylon herself might appear in human form.
What if everything we thought we knew about this great nation was designed to bring about the greatest conspiracy of all time? A conspiracy for the souls of humanity. What if I told you that America was founded by the darkest elite secret societies, and that there are still powerful remnants, controlling hands in high positions, carrying this torch? Dr. Thomas Horn, William Ramsey, Russ Dizdar.
It's like God ripped open Hell's Kitchen and said, hey, here's some of the sequence of satanic evolution.
Colonel Robert McGinnis, Wes Fall, Carl Teichrob, Justin Fall.
It is the ritual that would ignite the resurrection of the Antichrist.
Belly of the Beast.
The holidays are rapidly approaching, and now's your chance to save big on the largest TV giveaway of the year. Skywatch TV is proud to announce the Belly of the Beast Grand Giveaway. In the brand new documentary, Belly of the Beast, you'll discover for the first time why a Bible is bound in a magic square inside the testes of the Washington Monument, where and why a buried ancient magical obelisk awaits underground nearby, where the entrance to a secret crypt exists connected to American Lucifer worship from within the deep state, and for the first time ever, the U.S. government-owned location where the Antichrist will be resurrected on American soil. When you order Belly of the Beast from Skywatch TV, you'll also receive Lady Queensborough's celebrated original 1933 Occult Theocracy 2-volume collection, beautifully republished by Defender Publishing. These books are classic exposés on the secret societies, from witches to Knights Templar, Freemasons to Rosicrucians, Druids to the Illuminati, Masonic and pagan symbols, Christian Science, the Order of the Jesuits, and so much more. Dr. Thomas Horn says no serious researcher's library is complete without this massive 2-volume collection. These 2 books alone hold a retail value of $80. Yours now, free when you purchase the Belly of the Beast Grand Giveaway. But we're just getting started. You'll also receive a gargantuan supply of brand new, super quality, overstock gift books, DVDs, audio sets, survival and organic living books, and more to add to your library or to give away as gifts this holiday season. Sold separately, this grand giveaway holds a retail value of over $350. Yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. So don't delay. This avalanche of holiday gifts is perfect for the serious researcher in your life, but is only available while supplies last. So take advantage of this, the largest Skywatch TV giveaway of 2018, while you can when you order the Belly of the Beast Grand Giveaway, now at the Skywatch TV store. Order online or call 1-844-750-4985.
A new take on the prophesied war of Gog and Magog. Forget about Russia coming from the uttermost parts of the north. The enemy foreseen by the prophet Ezekiel is so much bigger and so much older. It's Last Clash of the Titans by Derek P. Gilbert, a #1 new release in Amazon's Christian history category. Last Clash of the Titans breaks down step by step how Greek mythology grew out of Canaanite religion, why the old gods of the Greeks, the Titans, were the Watchers who descended on the summit of Mount Hermon, and why the Titans will return from the abyss for one final battle against God, Armageddon. Last Clash of the Titans, backed up by peer-reviewed academic research. Tom Horn calls this book stunning. Last Clash of the Titans, the second coming of Hercules, Leviathan, and the prophesied war between Jesus Christ and the gods of antiquity. Get it as part of a special offer at skywatchtvstore.com and available now in paperback and as a Kindle ebook at amazon.com. Merry non-pagan Christmas! Dr. Judd Burton joins us in about an hour to talk about how December 25th came to be the day that we celebrate the birth of Christ. But now we talk about what we may see in the year ahead as we head into the New Year's Day celebration and the New Year's holiday. He is a former U.S. Army Arabic linguist and civilian consultant to U.S. Special Operations Command, the author of books on the Middle East and on Middle Earth, and we've enjoyed our discussions on both of those subjects. A professor of history whose books include 10 Years Captivation with the Mahdi's Camps, essays on Muslim eschatology, the brilliantly named Sects, Lies, and the Caliphate, and Holiest Wars. His website is occidentaljihadist.com. We welcome back to the program Dr. Timothy Furnish. Tim, thanks for joining us, especially while you're traveling.
Oh, it's an honor to be on, Derek. Glad you're having me.
For those of us in the West, we talked about this before, who raised in a Christianized nation, more or less, it's a little difficult for us to understand what motivates Muslims to do what they do. And as we try to figure out what might be coming down the pike in 2019, it seemed like that might be a good time to have this conversation, or at least to kind of revisit the topic a little bit. Specifically, as we look at an area that's in the news this week because of the president's decision to withdraw troops from Syria, which, of course, has an impact on Turkey. The Turks, and especially President Erdogan there, doesn't want the Kurds to roam free and unchecked, and he's threatened to invade. He's also threatened to do everything in his power to frustrate the sanctions that the United States has imposed on Iran. That struck me as a little bit odd because Turkey is a Sunni nation majority and Iran is majority Shia. Where do they find common ground?
Well, I think where they find common ground is Erdogan is more sympathetic than a lot of past than I think every other previous ruler of the Republic of Turkey, and certainly more than any other Ottoman sultan before him for centuries. More sympathetic to the idea of a pan-Islamic, maybe not union or alliance, but a pan-Islamic front, if you will, against the West. I mean, historically, you look back from the founding of the Ottoman state, in the 14th century to the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453 and up through the Ottoman conquests. And, remember the Ottoman Empire lasts, a lot of people think it stops at World War I, and actually lasts through World War I before it's finally disposed of by Ataturk and the founders of the Republic of Turkey. The Ottoman state was a profoundly Sunni state, and it was pretty much inveterately opposed to the Twelver Shia state that existed to its east in Persia or Iran, which for most of that period of Ottoman hegemony was called the Safavid Empire. But then the predecessor state there, the Qajars, and of course the two Shahs of the 20th century, although they ruled as secular rulers, and then certainly the Islamic State that was established, the Islamic Republic established in Iran in 1979, these are all Twelver Shia states, and to one degree or another, Twelver Shiism was, actively supported by the state, except again with the exception perhaps of the two Shahs in the 20th century. And again, historically, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, the Sunni and Shia don't get along too well. But it seems that Erdogan has this viewpoint, which to some measure can be described, I think, accurately as neo-Ottoman. And I tend to look at it as like, if you remember, Derek, back when the Soviet Union first collapsed, and we had Russia, and we had the other republics that came out of what had been the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan and Ukraine and Belarus and Latvia, Livonia, Estonia, and all those places. And remember this phrase, Russia's near abroad. And first under Yeltsin and then under Putin, we don't hear this phrase much anymore. But basically, the idea was that the leadership of Russia maybe didn't want to reconquer areas that had been the Soviet Union, but felt like they had sort of dibs on those areas, and that no one else should have any, no one else should meddle in there. This is why the expansion of NATO to a place like Ukraine, for instance, or the Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia area was so troubling to the Russians. Excuse me. And I think Erdogan tends to see what had been the area of control of the Ottoman Empire, which, remember, at its height, reached across North Africa, all the way down to Sudan and Yemen, and then up into Europe, way up into Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, and the Balkans. And particularly, of course, most saliently, what is now the Arab Middle East was most of it was under Ottoman control. So I think Erdogan tends to see the Middle East, exclusive of Iran or Persia, as really a Turkish area, sort of Turkey's near abroad, looking back to what it had been under the Ottomans. You hear a lot of stuff about how he wants to recreate the Ottoman Empire, and I don't think he really thinks that can be done, but I think he thinks that Turkey's areas of responsibility, if not outright control, extend beyond the borders of what are now the current Republic of Turkey. But I think he also has this idea that the Islam, which meshes well with a lot of the Islamist and Islamic terrorist and fundamentalist groups, the idea that which is pretty troubling and peculiar for a NATO member, right? Mm-hmm. Don't forget, Turkey is in NATO. He has this idea that the Islamic world is under attack from the West. I mean, it's probably not as severe as the viewpoint of the leaders of ISIS or Al Qaeda or someone like that, but it does seem to mesh to some degree with the viewpoint that comes out of Iran, which is, again, that the Islamic world, that from their point of view, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And although historically, going back for at least half a millennium, Iran and Turkey have been at loggerheads, well, they have a bigger enemy, which is with the West. So I think that he personally believes this. I don't think a lot of Turks believe this. I think a lot of Turks look with disfavor on the Islamic Republic in Iran because they don't want to be ruled by a bunch of mullahs. And I think that a lot of people don't necessarily agree with Erdogan's view on this, but Erdogan runs the country. Erdogan has sort of done for Turkey what, to some degree, Putin has done for Russia, which is sort of, if not quite restore their former imperial glory, at least make them sort of a force to be reckoned with, or at least listened to on the world stage. So I think that's a lot of what's going on here. I am not convinced that this viewpoint will exist past Erdogan being in power. But again, it looks like Erdogan's going to be in power for a while. So I think basically what this amounts to, in my long-winded way of trying to explain it, is that your correct observance, your correct and concise observance of the heretofore pretty much always extant differences between Sunni and Shia Islam, and particularly the two, historically over the last half millennium, would have been the two main Sunni and Shia states, Turkey or the Ottoman Empire in Iran, that is sort of being trumped at the moment. No Western pun intended, although one could insert one here. That is being trumped by the fact that the leaders of Iran and the current president of Turkey think that they have more in common in presenting united front than they do, sort of, I guess, that can paper over the differences between them.
You mentioned the sense that Erdogan may feel that they're sort of under attack from the West. How much of this is due to the importance that most people in Islam place on their religion compared to the importance that most Western Christians place on their religion? In other words, we in the West seem to have this underlying assumption that everywhere in the world there's somebody who's really a Western-style Democrat just waiting to get out, and small d Democrat, just waiting to get out.
Jeffersonian Democrat, yes, trying to be bored, yes.
Right, and that if we just go and we show them, we liberate them from their strongman, like Saddam Hussein or Hosni Mubarak or Muammar Gaddafi, suddenly everything will be fine, and they'll have this wonderful representative republic will spring up in its place. And they look to the West and see what comes out of Hollywood, our music scene, and they're like, we don't want our, think what we will about, their religion. They see that as an assault on their values. and their religion, whereas we just see it as, well, what? What are you talking about? So, again, my long-winded question, how much of this is related to the difference in the way they view their religion versus the way we view our religion?
Well, a lot of it is. Keep in mind, though, again, there are varying degrees of this depending on where you are in the Islamic world. I mean, I know I've been to Turkey a couple of times, and I've got a lot of good friends that are Turks, and I think Turkey is almost evenly divided between people that want a more Islamic state, that think that Turkey, starting with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1922-23, the establishment of the Turkish Republic, and the forcible removal from the public square, really, of Islam, which was done under Ataturk, and which was the case up until the 1990s. They think that went too far, and in fact, that's the reason that the AK party, Akva Devlet, Kalkın Ma, the Justice and Development Party, which is the party of Erdogan that runs the country, manages always to get a slight majority. At least it has in the last, for the last 15 years or so, 10, 15 years in the elections. There are many, many people in Turkey that think the pendulum swung too far. And one can sort of see why they think that's the case. I mean, there was a law, in Turkey, you weren't allowed, for instance, to, if a woman was elected to the Turkish Meclis, Turkish parliament, she was not allowed to cover her head. I mean, we're not talking the black chador thing like the fundamentalists wear. We're talking just wear a head covering. I mean, this would be akin to a woman being elected to the U.S. Congress and not being able to wear a cross around her neck. Mm-hmm. And people, that simply went too far. A lot of people have that, and I'm sort of sympathetic to that. But so I think that's part of in Turkey is sort of a unique case in many ways, because it is the most westernized Muslim country, I think, certainly in the Middle East. One could certainly say that pretty easily. Excuse me. In other places, it's a bit different. There are many people that agree with Western ideas of human rights. I mean, there are many people in Turkey that do, that agree with the idea that Western ideas of human rights and women's rights and LGBT and all that stuff, or LGBTQ, I don't know how many consonants I'm supposed to put in there anymore.
Just end it with a plus sign and you're good.
Yeah, I don't know. Yes, yeah. Right. I'm sure I don't use the proper pronouns, but that's the way it goes. But there, I mean, goes to this whole idea of, are Western ideas of human rights universal? And those of us in the West just automatically accept that they are. But many, many, many in the Islamic world, some in the Islamic world will agree with that, but many don't. And that's where the rub comes in. And the fissure is not just between certain countries. It runs down the middle of these countries. There are people in Turkey on both sides of the fence. There are people in Iran, for that matter, on both sides of the fence. There probably aren't many in Yemen on both sides of the fence, but, Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia, Turkey, Iran, there are people on both sides of the fence. And of course, the problem is that the ones on the side of the fence that Western values are corrupt and of shaitan and undermining of Islam, if not anti-Islamic, those are the people that, many of them, not all of them, but many of them will resort to not just political strong-arming and putting their people in power if they get a chance, but actual violence. So, it's in Huntington's famous phrase, it's not just a clash between civilizations, it's a clash within civilizations, within the Islamic world itself. There are people on all sides of the fence. But it is clear that if you look at this in sort of a meta-historical, geopolitical, analytical view, the main culture in the world that has the most people that have a problem with modernity, which is, I think, the best thing to call it, right, happen to be in the Islamic world because of Islamic history, and not just that, because of Islamic theology, because of the theology in the Quran and the Hadiths, the alleged sayings of Muhammad, many of which are diametrically opposed to many things that those of us in the West take for granted.
We're talking with Dr. Timothy Furnish on A View from the Bunker. He's an expert on Islamic history and Islamic eschatology. This week, of course, President Trump announced, which caught the Pentagon by surprise, James Mattis decided he was just going to resign, and once the president had time to digest his letter of resignation, he said, "No, you're not going to stay until the end of February. You're gone next week, Wednesday, January 1st. The response from the Washington establishment is that this was a huge mistake and it's going to destabilize the region because ISIS will come back. But a day later, I read an analysis of the situation in Iraq, and that is the minority Sunnis there are being punished by the government in Baghdad, which is now run by the majority Shias, thanks to our removal of the strongman Saddam Hussein back in 2003. And that they may be turning to the Islamic State, or at least more open to the idea of the Islamic State coming back, because they need protection, and that was the only real protection they had from Baghdad. So my question then is, can we, even if we keep our troops in the region, and our troops are going to stay in Iraq as far as I know, can we prevent the Islamic State from returning under the current situation inside Iraq?
I think in Iraq we can. I think that although I sort of technically support the president's decision, I really wish we were pulling out of Afghanistan, not Syria, because God knows what, or Allah perhaps knows what we're doing there 17 years after we invaded to deplatform it, from ISIS control. But I understand why the president wants to do this. He doesn't want to, we've been in Afghanistan for 17 years. How long were we in Iraq? Mm-hmm. Probably too long. So I sort of understand that, but I will criticize the president because I don't think we should pull our forces out until the last postage stamp sized bit of territory that ISIS can still lay claim to as a territorial caliphate is wiped out. And they've still got some territory in the wilds of eastern Syria that. Not just, I have to go look. I was just, in fact, looking here on the computer trying to find the latest map of areas of control. I couldn't find it. But, the territory that they control has been reduced by, 90% or something since the president came in from when Obama was in there. But I think we should keep our forces in there until all of that area is gone. And then at that point, ISIS will have devolved fully back into a mere, and I hate to say it like that, but it's true, a mere terrorist group, and not a group that has any sort of territorial caliphate that it can claim. So that's my problem with President Trump doing that. I find it a bit amusing, these crocodile tears from all these people on the left who've been decrying all these Republican wars all these years, and now all of a sudden Trump is winding one down and they have a problem with it? Yes, I'm not sure I believe that.
Yeah, Lindsey Graham's comment that this was an Obama-like mistake is humorous, considering that it was President Obama who promised we wouldn't have any boots on the ground in Syria, and he's the one who put them there. So,
yes, Senator Graham, reached clarity during the Kavanaugh hearings. Mm-hmm. Now he's turning back into his McCain-esque self, I guess. I don't know. I don't know which one's the real one. But, he was one of the ones, speaking of those two, Graham and McCain, that we heard from years about the moderate Syrian opposition, right, Derek? Mm-hmm. There is no moderate Syrian opposition except for the Kurds, all right? Now, and that brings up, of course, the big problem a lot of people have brought up, which is, are we leaving the Kurds in the lurch? And as you know, maybe a lot of your listeners don't, the Kurds have been getting the short end of the stick in the Middle East since 1918. At the end of World War I, when Woodrow Wilson, before he came back home to the States and had his stroke and his wife were in the country for a while, Woodrow Wilson extolled, of course, the virtues of self-determination of the peoples in the Middle East, except some people had more self-determination than others, right? Mm-hmm. And the Kurds wound up getting, the most numerous group of people on earth, as far as I know, that don't have their own homeland.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, but of course the problem with that is that if the Kurds were to be granted a homeland, then it would carve off territory from Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Of course, the Kurds in northern Iraq are de facto sort of their own state at this point anyway. But this is the big reason that Erdogan has a problem, to speak of Erdogan again, that Erdogan has a problem with what's going on, or what's been going on, I should say, is that we have been sort of de facto allied with the Kurds, who are, in my experience in the Middle East, perhaps the most pro-American people in the Middle East, and that includes Israelis. The Kurds are very pro-American. There are various and sundry groups of Kurds. I don't know if you want to get into that, but they are broken down politically. Most of them are Sunni Muslim, but there are political differences. There are political differences between them. But most of the Kurds live in southern and eastern Turkey, and so Turkey has the most to lose from a Kurdish nationalist movement. And this is the big reason why Erdogan has basically been lukewarm at best in supporting us against ISIS, because to support us against ISIS means he would have to basically agree with us in helping the Kurds, and he doesn't want to do that. So anyway, again, it was a long-winded way of saying I think that what's going to happen with ISIS, I think one reason, let's put it this way, I think one, if not the major reason, that the president's pulling out of Syria, besides that he said he would when he ran for president eventually after defeating ISIS, is that Syria has become a failed state. I know it has a failed, let's put it this way, it's a failed state in the sense that it was before 2011 when all of this started happening, right? Because remember, the Syrian civil war started as part of the so-called Arab Spring in March, April, May of 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could look at territory control of Syria, I mean, basically it's broken up into the government of Syria under Bashar al-Assad controls, I don't know, maybe 60, 70, I don't think it's even that much, somewhat north of 50% of the country. But much of the country is effectively no longer under the control of the Damascus government. And I just don't see any way in which its territorial integrity, such as it was from 1945 until 2011, can be restored. I don't think you can put Humpty Dumpty back up on that wall. Syria is eventually, I think, going to break up into several smaller statelets. And, unless one wants to argue that we want to stay there and be involved in fixing that mess, because we haven't done very damn good at fixing other messes that we got involved in, even heeding, of course, the famous adage from General Powell that if you break it, you own it. But to be fair, we didn't actually break Syria. They broke it themselves. We tried to help put it back together. I'm not sure that, as I said earlier, I'm not sure we should be leaving right at this moment, but I would like us to have stayed until every last, as I said, vestige of territory that ISIS controls is wiped out, and then Syria will just be a terrorist group again and not a state that controls any territory. But anyway, the long-winded way of answering your question, I think that in Iraq, the government is more stable, the government controls the country better. We will continue to help the government of Iraq. I think that they can effectively prevent ISIS from reestablish any sort of territorial control. In Syria, I'm not sure that they can.
The issue that you raise, I think, is one that we don't consider well here in the West, and that is the reason there were strongmen representing the minority groups in Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and Assad and his father before him in Syria. The Assad family is Alawite, and of course Hussein represented the Sunni minority in Iraq. Why would people representing minority groups like that emerge as a strongman? How do they put their coalitions together, and why are they so desperate to hang on to power?
Well, they were desperate to hang on to power so they didn't get slaughtered. How did they do it? They were very wily and bloodthirsty. That's how they did it. Saddam, as you correctly observed, although the Sunni minority is not as small as the Alawi in Syria, but the Sunnis are about 35%, I think, or thereabouts of the Iraqi population, about 65% Shia. People often break it up into Sunni, Shia, and Kurd, but that really doesn't make any sense because the Kurds are mostly Sunni. That you would have to break it up into Arab and Kurdish if you wanted to use that sort of delineation. But Saddam, smart enough and wily enough and brutal enough to seize power from the military. I mean, using the military as his power base and took over. And of course, Syria is a bit different, as you correctly observed. The leadership of Syria, starting in the 60s, was first Bashar al-Assad. Well, actually, he actually took over in 1970. He was part of sort of a junta. But Bashar al-Assad, and then Hafez al-Assad, and then his son, of course, Bashar, are members of the Alawi tribe. They're members of the Alawi minority religion, which is about 10-11% of the religion all of the religious people of Syria. It's a strange, sort of weird medieval offshoot of Twelver Shiism. Very secretive, very weird. It's so different. It's become so different from Twelver Shiism that it's considered a separate religion at this point. They were very persecuted of the Ottomans. and they knew that if the 75% of the majority in Syria, which is Sunni, were to get power, they'd probably treat them just like the Ottomans did, which wasn't very well. I mean, there are fatwas. I wrote about this in an article I wrote some years ago. There are fatwas from the famous Ibn Taymiyyah, sort of the godfather of modern Islamic fundamentalism in the 14th century, who was the major influence on Ibn Abdul Wahhab, whose, of course, ideas became the foundation of Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia. Ibn Taymiyyah, back in the 1400s, early 1300s, I should say, 14th century, wrote fatwas condemning the Alawis in Syria, as worse than Jews and Christians, as murtadun, apostates whose property was subject to seizure and whose lives were forfeit. You basically, according to his fatwa, you could kill an Alawi, no questions asked. And so the Alawi. So basically, what happened was in Syria, particularly, Hafiz al-Assad infiltrated or got himself to be a power broker in what was called the Ba'ath Party, which is the same party, by the way, that Saddam belonged to over in Iraq. It's an Arab socialist party. And they basically took that over to prevent the Alawis, that is, took over the Ba'ath Party and installed, and particularly under Hafiz al-Assad, took over key places in the Mukhabarat, the intelligence agencies, and the armed forces, which has allowed them to basically leverage themselves so they could run the country. and even more so than the Sunni minority in Iraq, the Alawi minority in Syria, I think, has very real and legitimate concerns of persecution, if not genocide. Now, this does not justify dropping, chlorine gas barrel bombs on civilian populations. I'm not saying that, but basically, I'm saying that, in a very nasty part of the world, you're either on top or you're not. And the Alawi calculus is that we're on top or we're dead. Now, one could envision, perhaps, hearkening back to what I said earlier about perhaps Syria breaking up into several smaller statelets, such as it was, if you go back and look in the 1920s under the French Mandate. The Alawis actually were in a smaller, separate sort of quasi-autonomous state up around Latakia and up in the northwestern part of the country. And I could envision, perhaps, if all of the major powers of the world got together and got on the same sheet of music, and they could say, well, okay, we will guarantee Alawi safety in this Alawi homeland. They have to abandon Damascus, and they have to give, the lion's share of the country has to go back to the control, or has to go to, I guess for the first time, the control of the Arab Sunni majority. But that would require major, major, major cooperation between the U.S. and Russia, and I guess at this point Iran, since Iran's so involved there, and I just don't see that happening. It's sure as heck not going to happen with us pulling out. But on the other hand, one could also argue that, as I said earlier, we didn't break Syria. The Syrians themselves broke. Mm-hmm. I mean, one can argue that we're not to blame for this one. Iraq, we broke it. Okay, I think we have a lot more responsibility there. Afghanistan, yes. Syria, I'm sorry, not our fault. We try to do something about it, and you can't fix everything.
Yeah. Well, in the entire region, when you go back 6,000 years, you don't find many periods of lasting peace there. It's not a surprise that when you go back to the days of the time of the Bible, there were a bunch of city-states. There were a few, empires that arose here and there, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians. But even then, after a century or two, things rolled back and things once again fractured. That's just the way things work in that part of the world. And who knows? Here in America, maybe things will work that way too in the next century or two. Because even Rome didn't last forever. We're talking with Dr. Timothy Furnish. He is an expert on Islamic eschatology and Islamic history. He is the author of several books that we recommend. 10 Years Captivation with the Mahdi's Camps, Sects, Lies, and the Caliphate and Holiest Wars. His website, OccidentalJihadist.com. We're going to take a short break and come back. What is the difference between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam, especially regarding their expectations of the future? In other words, what do they believe about the end times, the Mahdi, and how might that affect your future? I'm Derek Gilbert. This is A View from the Bunker. Cutting-edge analysis of end times prophecy on the very ground where it all unfolds. It's the Skywatch TV Wars of the Gods Tour of Israel, May 12th through 23rd, 2019, hosted by Derek and Sharon Gilbert, and Pastor Carl Gallups, best-selling author of Gods and Thrones and Gods of Ground Zero, Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat of Messiah of Israel Ministries, and filmmakers Justin and Wes Fall, producers of the Hollow Earth Chronicles. This is a once-in-a-lifetime tour of the Holy Land from Mount Hermon to the Dead Sea. You'll walk in Jesus' footsteps on the battlegrounds of the supernatural war with preaching and teaching along the way. Shiloh, Bethel, Mount Carmel, Nazareth, the Jordan River, the Mount of Olives, Sea of Galilee, the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jerusalem, where the final battle will be fought for God's Mount of Assembly, Zion. The Skywatch TV Wars of the Gods Tour of Israel. Reserve your place now. For information and registration, log on to lipkintours.com. That's lipkintours.com. Driving the internet to think, live every Sunday night. This is A View from the Bunker. Thanks for tuning in tonight. I am Derek Gilbert, and we turn to our conversation with expert on Islamic history and Islamic eschatology, Dr. Timothy Furnish, because it really makes it difficult for us to imagine how we proceed. I find it difficult to believe that our leaders in Washington, D.C. are as ignorant about Islam and its expectations of the future and how that affects foreign policy as they seem to be. Tim, what are the basic differences in terms of eschatology between Shia Islam and Sunni Islam? And I know that's a topic we could spend hours on, but just in a nutshell, and then how does that, in your analysis, who poses the greater threat to our future, if any?
Oh gosh, Derek, let's see. First of all, yes, about the ignorance of our leadership on this. Yeah, it's very real. I mean, they are barely willing, at least under the Trump administration, as you might know this. And some of your listeners might want to look at it. If you look at my website, a month or two ago, I did an pretty in-depth analysis of the president's national counterterrorism strategy. And I think I entitled it something along the lines of, in the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. At least under Trump, we have one eye open. He does acknowledge that Islam has something to do with terrorism. But then they caveated it around with all this, the State Department people got at it, I'm sure, and some of the Pentagon people, and no doubt some of the CIA people. And it was turned into this thing about, the term radical Islam, extremist Islam. Jihad is not radical or extremist. Jihad is mainstream. You know who the radicals and extremists are in Islam? The people that don't believe in jihad. That's who the radical. And there are some of them, particularly in the sects of Islam, as we've talked about before. But for the most part, when you have policymakers that are just, many of whom are loath to admit that religion has anything to do with the way people act in the real world, or in the political and military world, I guess I should say, they're sure as heck not going to admit anything like eschatology has something to do with anything, Derek. Mm-hmm. That's for crazy people like you and me. Anyway, all right, so since we're crazy people that agree this is a topic, let's talk about it. Sunni and Shia both believe that one day the entire world will become Muslim. Partly voluntarily and partly by force. And basically, they both also believe that, and by the way, let me caveat that by saying, if I can be like Al Haig and use caveat as a verb, let me caveat that and say that that there is more than one flavor of Shia, all right? And when we're talking about Shia, I think what you mean and what I'm going to respond in kind is mainly 12 are Shia, although they are not the totality of Shiism. They are the largest branch. Basically, Sunni and Shia both believe that a figure called the Mahdi will come, the rightly guided one, that Jesus will return. Jesus will come back to earth, reveal that he was a Muslim all along, that the Christians got it all wrong, that the Muslim pious belief that the Bible was altered to change the true teachings about Jesus. Jesus will verify that was the case. He was a good Muslim. He and the Mahdi will then work together to basically take over the world for Islam. And then there are different hadiths, Islamic traditions about how exactly this will happen. The Sunnis have some traditions about it. The 12 or Shia have their other traditions about it. Basically, it kind of boils down to who's top dog. Is it the Mahdi or Jesus? And really kind of what it is for the 12 or Shia, the Mahdi is kind of the leader and Jesus is his helper. And for the Sunnis, it's sort of the other way around. But of course, when Jesus comes to earth and reveals that he was a Muslim, then, that doesn't make Jesus any sort of Christian prophet. He's a Muslim prophet. So basically what happens is Jesus and the Mahdi will make the entire world Muslim, partly through killing the bad guys, the main bad guy being a guy called the Dajjal. It literally is the deceiver in Arabic. It's sort of the Islamic Antichrist. And, some of the traditions say that actually Jesus is the only one that can kill the Antichrist, the Dajjal. But really the guy that will do the job, the main heavy lifting of convincing the rest of the world to convert to Islam and conquering people that don't want to will be done by the Mahdi. Now, the main difference is this. For the Sunnis, the Mahdi has not been here yet. There have been a plethora of false Mahdis, and that's what my first book was about, Holiest Wars, which was basically based on my doctoral dissertation, the book that came out in 2005. I looked at some of the main Sunni claimants to be the Mahdi have been across space and time. And if anybody's seen the movie Khartoum with Charlton Heston and Olivier from I think it was 1964, I think. This is about probably the only one that most Westerners have any familiar with would be the Sudanese Mahdi of the 1880s in Sudan, who fought the Ottomans and also fought the British. And of course, famously, his men beheaded General Charles Gordon in Khartoum in January of 1885. But there have been other examples of it. I mean, most recently, in terms of large-scale Sunni Mahdism, you had the 1979 attempt to overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia when a bunch of followers of a guy named Jahaman al-Tabi, who claimed that his brother-in-law, a guy named Muhammad al-Qahtani, was the Mahdi, took over the Great Mosque in Mecca in November of 1979 and occupied it for about 3 weeks until the Saudis hired French special forces to come in and take care of it. So that was, who the word was, had to, quote unquote, and I'm putting air quotes around this word, convert to Islam as they were flying into Mecca. But the Saudis could not deal with this issue. And so there have been other examples of that. Again, if you get my other book, the other one you mentioned, the 10 Years Captivation with the Mahdi's Camps, I talk about, several dozen other much smaller scale claimants to the Mahdi, to be the Mahdi in the Sunni world. But basically, for the Sunnis, what it amounts to is the Mahdi is someone that will sort of emerge onto the stage, the historical stage, and he will not immediately be known as the Mahdi. He will be basically first a great political leader and a great military conqueror, sort of like an Islamic Napoleon figure. And eventually, Muslims will finally realize, oh, this is the Mahdi. He's conquered more and more of the world, and he's about to conquer the whole world. And then, of course, when Jesus shows up, then all doubt will be removed. But that's kind of how it works according to the Sunni beliefs and traditions. The 12 Shia have quite a different belief about this. The 12 Shia, and in fact, the very reason for the very raison d'etre, I had to get a little French in there, Derek, that exhausts my French. Mm-hmm. The very reason for existence of the 12 Shiism branch of Islam is that there were 12 imams, and the word imam, small I, basically means someone who leads the prayers on Friday in a mosque. Basically, we capitalize it with a large I to mean a Sunni leader, particularly a political religious leader. But the word basically means somebody who's in front of. There have been 12 imams, capital I's, if you will, people that, according to the largest branch of Shiism, should have been the caliphs and should have been the leaders of the Islamic world. But these intransigent, wrong-headed Sunnis would not agree. And the first one, of course, is Ali, who was Muhammad's cousin, much younger cousin, but he also married Muhammad's daughter, Fatima. And so he was the closest male relative to the Islamic prophet, and of course they had two sons, Hassan and Hussein, both of whom thus were grandsons of Muhammad. So what the 12 Shia do is they traced across, over the years, they traced 12 descendants of Muhammad through Ali, down to another kid, a young boy named Muhammad. He was actually named Muhammad also, in the 9th century, who disappeared. Now, as a Christian and as a historian, I happen to think this young child just died. But if you allow for the fact that he died, then your branch of the religion dies out. So the 12er Shia came up with this very, pious messianic myth that the 12th Imam, who was named Muhammad, never died. He disappeared. He went into some sort of mystical state of sort of hibernation called in Arabic ghaiba, which is the same word in Arabic for a eclipse of the moon. And that he's been in this mystical state of hiding ever since the 9th century A.D. And then and then there's some permutations here where there was the minor occultation, the major occultation, where he disappeared, but he was still in contact with his followers, and then that contact all ceased, and it gets very abstruse. But anyway, basically in the 9th century, he disappeared. So the central belief, the central tenet of 12er Shia Islam is that the 12th Imam, who disappeared, will return someday, and he will be a Mahdi. He will be the eschatological figure at the end of time that links up with Jesus and makes the world, basically conquers and converts the world to Islam. But of course, unlike the Sunni Mahdi, who will convert everybody and conquer everybody in the name of Sunni Islam, this guy will do it along with the help of Jesus in the name of Shia Islam. So that's basically Sunni Shia eschatology in a nutshell.
Now, it sounds to me, since you're dealing with the supernatural aspect of the Shia Mahdi, it's sort of like a religious King Arthur figure. He'll return when Britain needs him most, from the Isle of Avalon. Yes. Whereas under Sunni Islam, if I understand correctly, somebody who's properly pious could be the rightly guided one who then is empowered by Allah to lead the forces of Islam. So you've got a very different approaches where almost, how does this explain why there have been so many false Mahdis under Sunni Islam?
Yes, very astute of you, Derek. Thank you. Yes, usually it takes me an entire course to get a student to figure that out, and you figured it out in 30 seconds.
Well, I've read your book. So.
You cheated. Basically, it is very hard to fake, or not, I shouldn't say fake, because a lot of these guys, some of these guys that thought they were the Mahdi, I think, are clearly faking just for power and whatever else. Some of them were clearly convinced they were. But it's very hard to convince people that you're the 12er, that you're the returned 12th Imam, because the returned 12th Imam, there are certain prohibiting factors. I mean, of course, one of the ones is that there's now developed this mythology in Iran that he will emerge at the Jam Quran Mosque. And the crass view of that is there's a well out behind the Jam Quran Mosque, which, by the way, if you look at my website, there's a picture of me. I went there in 2008 to a conference, and I think I took some pictures at the well, but they didn't come out or something. So there's a picture of me in the front of the mosque anyway. But there's an idea, the sort of crass view, that he will come out of this well at the 12th. The 12th Imam will crawl up out of his well or something. But no, it's much more mystical than that. But it's really hard to pull off the mystical part of that. You're right. For the Sunni, however, because again, as I said earlier, basically it's just a guy that basically wages jihad successfully. And if you wage successful enough jihad, then you can lay claim to, in some measure, to being the Mahdi. And this is what happened, like, for instance, with Muhammad Ahmad in Sudan, with some other guys. Probably the most successful Mahdi in history was a guy named Ibn Tumart, who lived in medieval Morocco. Both him and the Sunnis Mahdi, Muhammad Ahmad, one of their legitimating factors, they claim, was that, the prophet appeared to them in a dream, the prophet Muhammad. Well, I mean, you can't argue with what somebody says happened to him in a dream, can you? I mean, So
we got a few of those in Christendom. Not with Muhammad, but dreams of revelation, but
Right. Well, but I think the more salient factor is that both of them waged successful jihad. If their heads had been separated from their bodies at day 2, then probably that's not a really good argument that you're the Mahdi. But if you manage to conquer for several years, but I mean, of course, for instance, like Muhammad Ahmad declared himself Mahdi in 1880, 1881, spent 5 years, basically took over what is now more or less all of what is now modern Sudan, and then early in 1885, after they took over Khartoum, he died probably of malaria. Well, so these people were just, well, is he the Mahdi? What do we do? But basically, he had a caliph, a guy that called himself a caliph, a guy named Abdullah, who took over and ruled until 1898, when Kitchener came back with, whatever, what was that, Maxim guns or really automatic weapons? I always forget when they finally developed. But along with a young lieutenant named Winston Churchill and a British expeditionary force in 1898, which made short work of the Mahdi's, what was left of the Mahdi's forces by 1898. But yeah, you're exactly right. It is much easier in the Sunni world to try to claim you're the Mahdi, because you don't have to say, hey, I just appeared back from mystical occultation, right? You can just basically say, I fit, I've waged jihad, I've declared, that the existing Islamic rulers are not living up to Islam like we think they should. The prophet appeared to me in a dream. You can sort of pull this stuff out. Whereas if you want to try to declare yourself the returned 12th Imam, you got to explain where you've been the last millennium, and that's a little harder to do.
We're talking with Dr. Timothy Furnish on A View from the Bunker. His books include 10 Years Captivation with the Mahdi's Camps, Essays on Muslim Eschatology, and Sects, Lies, and the Caliphate. So if it strikes me that the difference between then what the Sunnis and the Shias expect out of the Mahdi is almost parallel to the difference between what Jews and Christians expect from the Messiah. I mean, Jews are expecting the Messiah to arrive for the first time, whereas Christians are expecting his return.
Mm-hmm.
And
except I would say, however, though, that in both cases, that the whether you're Sunni or Shia, the Sunni or Shia Mahdi is much more like the Moshiach in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew traditions, in that he will throw off foreign occupation, much like it was at the time of Jesus. One of the reasons Jesus was rejected was, well, he's not willing to kill all the Romans, and that was kind of what some people were expecting. And,
True,
but the Mahdi will be a warlord, primarily, basically a warlord that takes over the world, which, I think probably meshes a bit better with the at least major strain of the view of the Mashiach than it does with the Prince of Peace. Although, remember, when Jesus comes back in Revelation, it's not all sweetness and light, is it?
He'll be all out of bubblegum.
That's right.
The central control that the Ayatollahs hold over Shia Islam, how does that affect the ability of, and I ask this because I remember about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I was on daily conservative talk radio, that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the president at the time, was the focus of most of Western conservative punditry. He was sort of the face of the Islamic threat in the world. But the Ayatollahs really called the shots in Iran. So how easy would it be, or how difficult would it be for somebody like an Ahmadinejad to actually force the hand of Shia to, let's go forth and wage jihad and hope the Mahdi catches up to us, as compared to the kind of decentralized Mahdism in Sunni Islam?
I don't think it's going to happen. I think Iran's probably the last place it would happen, because someone came along and declared themselves the Mahdi, the 12th Imam return, then these guys would be all out of their Rolls Royces and their Rolexes and their, and hey, a lot of these guys got multiple wives. Those are not cheap, Derek. One wife is expensive enough, but 3, 4. So I think Iran might be the last place where there would be someone successfully claimed to be the Mahdi, because the power structure is so institutionalized to support the Ayatollahs. And by the way, ironically enough, you know who the only president of Iran that was not a cleric was?
That'd be Ahmadinejad.
Ahmadinejad, yeah. PhD in traffic management, whatever the heck that is. Sometimes I think we should hire. I live near Atlanta. Maybe they should hire him in Atlanta. Maybe he could do something about the road traffic down there. But yeah, he's the only guy that's been president of that country that wasn't a cleric, which is one reason I think he fought with him so much. He actually did fight with him a lot. And he's been sort of a thorn in the side of the Rouhani administration, although, as you correctly point out, really, who runs the shots? It's the highest-ranking Ayatollah, which is Khamenei. I mean, they can have elections all day long, but the supreme leader can still overrule anything that the president or the parliament of Iran does. So basically, I think there's two aspects to his questions. One is, where is it more likely that someone would emerge and claim to be the Mahdi? I think it's much more likely in the Sunni world, partly or largely because of what I said earlier. The traditions are much more malleable. You can sort of adopt them. You can pick ones that fit you. And then, again, if you're successful to a certain degree, you can start aspiring to trying to claim the mantle of the Mahdi. The other part of that, of course, is, I think you alluded to this, something about, is it possible to sort of force the hand of the emergence of the Mahdi? I mean, that's that interesting phrase that I stole from Reuben Paz, who was an Israeli professor at Herzliya for many years, called Hot Wiring the Apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big debate among those of us that study this as a subtopic, really, of terrorism, jihad studies, not just of Islamic theology, about, do the Iranians want to try to hotwire the apocalypse? And what I mean by that is, are there things that there's a belief among some Muslims, that there are some things you can do to sort of hasten the Mahdi's coming. And there are clearly some Muslims that believe that if you spark a major war with probably your major civilizational enemy, which would be the West, particularly the Christian West, which historically has been the main power block fighting against Muslim conquest, that this will somehow induce or force Allah's hand into sending the Mahdi. Now, I do think this idea exists, but I don't think it exists where a lot of people do. I don't think it exists in Twelver Shi'ism. A lot of people say this exists in Twelver Shi'ism and say that this is why the Iranians want nuclear weapons, because then they're going to nuke Tel Aviv, and then this will then spark a global conflict, or maybe they'll nuke New York, or maybe they'll nuke both. This will then spark a global conflagration, which will then Allah will then send the Mahdi to sort of rescue Muslims and get the chronology going. I don't think Twelver Shias believe this, because again, I've been studying Iran for a lot of years. I've been reading their stuff both politically and theologically, and I don't see this idea in Twelver Shia Islam. I do, however, see it in some of the Sunni groups. I think that Al-Qaeda I think that there are elements in Al-Qaeda that believe this, but most prominently, there have been clear indications over the last 4 years, since ISIS emerged onto the stage, that many in ISIS believe this. And this is actively what ISIS is trying to do. This had a lot to do with the fact that they have since lost it, but they tried to take the town of Davik in northern Syria up near the Turkish border. Because there are hadiths, again, those traditions going back to Muhammad, that the major eschatological battleground between the forces of Islam and the forces of the West, particularly Christian forces, will be at the town of Davik in northern Syria. So I really think that, and this is why I think ISIS is much more problematic than Iran. I don't think Iran's going to use nukes on anyone. Once they develop nukes, and trust me, they're going all out to develop nukes, I don't think they're going to use them. They want them for regime insurance. They saw what happened. Once North Korea got nuclear weapons, what happened? No one will touch them militarily. This is why the Ayatollahs want nukes. I don't think they want to use them on anyone. They're not stupid. The Ayatollahs get a nuke. They nuke Tel Aviv. What happens to Iran 22 minutes later when the Israeli bombs hit?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Iran is a glowing nuclear wasteland.
That's right.
And if the Twelver Shia believe anything, the leadership, that is, of Twelver Shia Iran believe anything, it's that Allah will be really mad at them if they bequeath to the Mahdi a glowing radioactive wasteland. So I don't think the Twelver Shia want to do this. Does ISIS want to do this? Yes, ISIS would do this in a heartbeat. And I think there are other terrorist groups on the terrorist list, and some elements of Al-Qaeda. I think Al-Qaeda, the leadership of Al-Qaeda is more divided on this issue. But I think there are elements of Al-Qaeda that clearly do this. But I don't think Twelver Shia, the leadership of Twelver Shia Iran is included in that category.
Well, Tim, I'll let you go because, again, I appreciate you taking time where you're traveling, visiting family for the holidays. We'll have to, discuss at some future time why the policy of the United States seems to be focused on the wrong direction in Islam. Because, again, if Iran is the great Islamic enemy or threat, let's put it that way, then we really got things turned the wrong way around. Dr. Timothy Furnish is an expert on Islamic history and Islamic eschatology. His books, 10 Years Captivation with the Mahdi's Camps, Sects, Lies in the Caliphate, and Holiest Wars. His website, OccidentalJihadist.com. And Tim, may I wish you a perfectly politically incorrect Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too, Derek, and all your listeners.
All right. Well, it is a fact that nobody, in spite of what you may have heard here recently, that nobody anywhere ever worshipped Nimrod. And there is no connection between Nimrod and Christmas. Well, okay, maybe the Freemasons worship Nimrod, but that's another story. How did December 25th become Christmas? Can you say Merry Christmas without inadvertently worshiping a pagan deity? Yes, you can. And we'll tell you why with Dr. Judd Burton next on A View from the Bunker.
Jack the Ripper's dark deeds actually began long before 1888. And it wasn't a mere man who committed the crimes, but a demon in league with devilish men, a group of men called Red Wing. Only one small group of valiant men and women stand against this evil, a group that place their faith in Christ alone, and they protect a secret of blood that Red Wing hopes to use to usher in the reign of Antichrist and the end of day.
Red Wing is called Red Wing because they want to kill the church. They want to forever stop Christ from coming back. So it's the Holy Spirit, the dove, with a murdered, has been slain, a wounded dove. Ultimately, we still have to remember that the one who is in control is God Almighty, and we have to go to Him, and we have to suit up every time we go out.
The Red Wing Saga by Sharon K. Gilbert.
Book 1.
Blood Lies.
Book 2.
Blood Rights.
Book 3.
The Blood is the Life.
Book 4.
Realms of Stone.
And coming soon, Book 5.
Realms of Fire. Available at SkywatchTVStore.com and paperback and Kindle at Amazon.com. Characters you'll love and a story you can't put down. The Red Wing Saga by Sharon K. Gilbert.
Churches and educational establishments from universities down to elementary schools are embracing New Age philosophy and are being seduced by heavy demonic forces that are masquerading as angels of light, ascended masters, spirit guides, and even Jesus Christ himself. Skywatch TV is proud to announce the second coming of the New Age official collection. When you order the new book, The Second Coming of the New Age by Stephen Bancars and Josh Peck, you'll receive the brand new DVD Beyond Supernatural, which includes never-before-released off-the-record interviews with the authors, detailing their long history of involvement with the New Age, and personal testimonies of their deliverance by Jesus Christ. And as a bonus, this DVD includes the entire Skywatch TV 5-part series exposing the infiltration of the New Age. Plus, you'll also receive on DVD The Book of Enoch, Fallen Angels, and Ancient Aliens, an exclusive production with Dr. Michael Heiser regarding the blatant lies of ancient astronaut theory and the horrifying nature of fallen angels and alien abduction. Also included is the brand new audio series, Doctrines of Devils. Listen as Stephen Bancars interviews Doreen Virtue, world-renowned former best-selling author and teacher for the New Age, as she explains her incredible supernatural journey out of the occult and into the arms of Jesus. This over 12-hour series features bonus interviews with Dr. Chuck Missler, Dr. Thomas Horn, John McTernan, Gary Bates, and many more on the subjects of ghosts, demons, and the supernatural. But that's not all. You'll also receive the oversized, beautifully republished classic masterpiece in hardback, Myths and Legends of Babylonia and Assyria. This work provides not only the account of the mysteries of the ancients, but extracts and presents to the reader the occultism driving much of the New Age and heretical doctrines today. Sold separately, these items hold a retail value of over $150. Yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. You can have access to everything you need to arm yourself against the onslaught of pervading spiritual darkness now. The Second Coming of the New Age official collection is available now at skywatchtvstore.com. Order now or call 1-844-750-4985.
Streaming live to the web every Sunday night, this is A View from the Bunker, VFTB.net. I'm Derek Gilbert, and you're hearing the voice of Natalie Hotteshell, one half of Vessels of Mercy. Friends of ours from down in Arkansas, and they've got a couple of Christmas recordings out now on SoundCloud. I will put the link in the show notes at VFTB.net. We'll play another to close out the program tonight. Nathaniel and Natalie, just a wonderful, wonderful pair of recordings that they gave me permission to feature tonight. One of the things that pops up every year about this time is the belief that Christians who dare to celebrate Christmas on December 25th are somehow engaging accidentally, inadvertently, in pagan worship. We are accidentally worshiping a pagan deity, Nimrod or Baal or some other, perhaps, Sol Invictus. Joining us to bring some clarity to this issue and perhaps to relieve you of guilt, we welcome our good friend, a historian, anthropologist, and archaeologist, the director and senior fellow of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, online at tioba.org, and author of a number of books, including Interview with the Giant. His website, burtonbeyond.com. Our friendly neighborhood PhD, Dr. Judd Burton. Judd, welcome back, and Merry Christmas, sir.
Merry Christmas, and thank you, Derek.
This is something that every year this issue comes around. It doesn't seem to be quite as antagonistic this year, or maybe I'm just not looking at social media as often as I did a year ago or in years past, and for some reason feeling happier. I'm not sure if there's a connection. But
go figure.
Yeah. And I don't mean to belittle anybody's beliefs, because for about 150 years now, we've been taught, after the work of Alexander Hislop and the two Babylons, that there are direct connections between aspects of Christian tradition and the ancient Near East and the pagan world that surrounded the lands of the Bible back in the days of the prophets and the apostles. But as I've dug into it, I've found that isn't the case. And then as I've looked at the work of other scholars, found that the date, December 25th, was actually sort of innocently selected too. It wasn't biblical, but it was kind of innocent. What research have you done into this topic, and what is your sense on whether Christians can celebrate or wish others a Merry Christmas without feeling like we're doing something wrong?
Well, I think the operative element here is that we're celebrating the birth of Christ. We could, and we should do that really every day to some degree. In our hearts, that's part of the chain of the story of the redemption of humanity through salvation in Christ. And so, it's the actual celebration, but its timing for some seems to be suspect. That is, in terms of its celebration near the winter solstice. Mm-hmm. And of course, pagan traditions the world over deem the winter solstice, one of the major festivals. The day you mentioned the Sol Invictus festival, which was on December the 25th. And there was also the Saturnalia festival that the Romans honored, which was on December the 17th. Mm-hmm. And they, at least for the Saturnalia celebration, there are some similarities in terms of like things that we do today, like gift giving, whatnot. But as I said, the functional element here is that we're honoring the birth of Christ. And, we can sit here and debate, as scholars have done, over, the exact date of the birth of Christ. Some people are comfortable with a winter date. Some people are comfortable with, a fall date, a September date. But, again, just driving home the point that it's the observance of the birth of Christ and its timing with regards to these other pagan festivals, in my estimation, is incidental. You could say the same thing about other observations, other celebrations that we have in the Christian calendar throughout the year, such as Easter. Mm-hmm. It's the focus of worship and adoration and honor that have to be central here. And so I don't know if that relieves anybody of guilt. I think it should. I don't think you should have guilt going into it to begin with. But I would say that there's some interesting elements about the choice of or why we celebrate Christmas when we do. The earliest, that is the December date, stems from the work of Hippolytus of Rome, who was an early Christian. And what's always been interesting about Hippolytus is the fact that there's this chain of tutelage going back from Hippolytus all the way to John the Apostle.
Yeah. Now, Hippolytus was an early theologian in the 2nd century or 3rd century.
Late 2nd, early 3rd century. That's right.
Okay,
that's right. And he learned from Irenaeus. Ostensibly, Irenaeus learned from Polycarp, and Polycarp was a student of John the Apostle. So there's some, there are some reasons for believing what Hippolytus has to say. Another thing that I always found interesting that scholars seem to neglect was one of the Jewish laws that required the shepherds to have their goats and sheep sheared by what would be in our calendar February. So the argument against, why would the shepherds be out, in the winter or whatever, in the cold weather, doesn't really hold a whole lot of water in my book. But those are just some sort of, temporal factoids that people might consider in terms of the timing of the honoring of the birth of Christ during the month of December. If not exactly the month of December, then I'm comfortable with a winter birth, but there are other scholars who say, again, a fall birth. In the end, it's just incidental. Again, going back to the focus of the holiday itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, our friend Dr. Michael Heiser has pointed out the work of a scholar named E.L. Martin, who wrote a book on this, and looking at the signs that in the heavens that John included in Revelation chapter 12, woman clothed in the sun. Woman clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet, concluded that the most likely date of the birth of Jesus was September 11th of 3 BC, which, of course, makes the 9/11 attacks even that much creepier. But
I know.
The date of December 25th, though, was being celebrated by Christians in North Africa, and there's an academic paper on this that I will link to in the show notes at VFTB.net that points this out. That as early as the 2nd century, Latin Christians in Rome and in North Africa wanted to find the date of Jesus' death, and for some reason they settled on March 25th of the year 29 A.D. Mm-hmm. And we that's a date that's a little puzzling because March 25 was not a Friday that year. It wasn't Passover Eve. And Passover Eve didn't even fall on a Friday in 29 AD or even in the month of March. So why they chose that date, we don't know. But somehow in the 2nd century, Latin Christians in Rome came up with this date as the date of the death of Jesus, March 25th. Well, there was a tradition in Judaism that renowned prophets were always born on the same date as the day they died, or they died on the same date that they were born. Or the date that they were conceived. And so if Jesus died on March 25th, well, you add 9 months to that date, because that, that must have been his date of conception, because that was their tradition. It's not biblical, but this was, a tradition among Jews. And of course, the early church was predominantly converted Jews. You add 9 months to March 25th, and lo and behold, you get December 25th. That's all there is to it. So, is it biblical? No, it's not biblical, but it wasn't nefarious either.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm familiar with the sources that you reference. But again, personally, I don't have a problem with a winter date, given some of the anthropological elements here, like the requirement again for having the sheep and their goats sheared, about what would be the equivalent of February on our calendar. I think that's pretty telling. And again, that certainly works for a September date, but it doesn't punch out a later winter date either.
Mm-hmm. The celebration of Saturnalia I find to be an interesting thing, because it derived actually from an older Greek festival, which actually was not Greek. It was actually Anatolian, called the Chronia, because Saturn and Kronos were the same deity, the grain god who overthrew their father, the sky god, by castration, and then were in turn overthrown by the storm god, Jupiter or Zeus. But the Chronia was not celebrated in winter. The earliest attestations of that show that it was celebrated in what is now southern Turkey, in the fall, in August, September timeframe. So again, you've got a pagan holiday with no set date. The Sol Invictus holiday, in fact, that was established by who was the emperor? Aurelian in 274 AD. That was set at December 25th, but by the early 4th century, that date had moved back to November. So again, you wonder about the influence of those dates on the choice of December 25th. In other words, it doesn't appear that the date December 25th was firm for these pagan festivals and pagan holidays. So it doesn't appear that there was a lot of reason for Christians to need to convert it or Christianize it, as it were.
Which even then was, the christening of sacred time and sacred space was very much a part of the mission function, and certainly after the emergence of the Catholic Church, once it began to send the Roman Catholic Church, that is, began to send its own missionaries into the hinterlands in Europe. That became, as you well know, essentially the marching orders to christen sacred time and sacred space.
Well, what doesn't seem. No, I was going to. Now, what about that then? Whether it was or it wasn't, because we know that there are other important dates in the calendar that have been Christianized. We talk about Halloween every year, and that is one aspect of it. I'll tell you what, I'm getting the beady-eyed stare from Sam T. Dachshund, which means once again we're going to have to make an unplanned stop here on the program, because he is staring at me with the eyes that mean I need to go, and I need to go now. So one of the interesting things that sometimes occurs when you work from a home studio, which is taking unplanned breaks in order to accommodate the canine companion. So we'll pick up this conversation on the other side of a short break here and discuss, is it wrong, even if December 25th was picked to Christianize a date with other meaning, is that really a bad thing? We're talking with Dr. Judd Burton on the weekend before Christmas of 2018. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.
For thousands of years, mankind has debated how creation began. Ancient texts tell us the story. But today, the real message behind the pivotal account of the Garden of Eden has been obfuscated and lost. That is, until now. World-renowned author Carl Gallups digs up the hidden truths from the book of Genesis to finally give back the knowledge that was lost to the world. Find out what really happened in the Garden of Eden, what Jesus taught about Eden on the cross, and how the conflict between Jesus and the gods of antiquity is about to erupt on planet Earth, fulfilling biblical prophecy. In the new book, Gods of Ground Zero, this explains everything.
Shall we begin?
Almost made it.
Let's begin now.
Oh, well. It's A View from the Bunker live on Sunday night, as if you couldn't tell. We're talking about the Christmas holiday and whether Christians can enjoy it without accidentally engaging in pagan worship. Our guest, Dr. Judd Burton. Judd, we were just starting to talk about before we were so rudely interrupted, whether...
That's the first for me is canine Yuletide bathroom break.
Exactly. I should have picked something longer than a minute. He was actually, for a dachshund, he moved pretty quickly there, but he's an old dude, so there's only so much that we can expect. Anyway,
right.
When we engage in say, the Christianization of something that was previously a pagan holiday, is that wrong? I mean, what are the spiritual or theological implications of doing something like that? Say with All Hallows Eve or All Saints Day, or something that is essentially putting a Christian spin or meaning on top of something that was previously a pagan holiday.
Well, again, going back to the sort of standing orders of the church to, even before the advent of the Roman Catholic Church, to sort of christen sacred time and sacred space, what have been the ramifications of that over the past, almost 2,000 years? It's been the spread of the faith, hasn't it, to some degree?
To reclaim territory.
Right, exactly. So there's this strategic element to it, a spiritual warfare element to it, I believe. It's very clear, sort of going back to conversations that you and I have had over the last year or two, about the geographical parameters of the old gods that were set down, in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that it's culturally accurate. I think that it's historically accurate and theologically accurate to say that a lot of that is reclamation. It's going back and taking back what was God's to begin with, and a huge component of that, a very significant component of that, is the spread of Christianity. Now, catching deities, that is, pagan deities, in so-called Christian clothing, is tantamount to heresy. Mm-hmm. So there's a line that just in terms of missiology that isn't crossed, that shouldn't be crossed, But again, it's very difficult to overlook the significant impact in terms of the spread of Christianity that this sort of overarching, in terms of a big picture, meta picture, that christening, sacred time, and sacred space, in different cultures, different geographical areas, the impact that that's had, not only on the world, but for the spread of Christianity, the message of Christ.
What kind of examples do we have of, say, taking a pagan god and putting them in Christian clothing? Are you thinking of certain saints that have been elevated to canonized status within the Catholic Church, or other traditions that have been handed down?
There's some. One that pops to mind is Saint Brede or Bridget in Celtic Christianity. There's been some debate, between specialists in Celtic literature and theologians and historians as to whether, this isn't, a very clear couching of a Celtic deity by the same name, Brede, which would be the Gaelic pronunciation. Is it the same, the same entity? Probably so, because even some of these saints, when you're dealing with hagiography, you're not necessarily dealing with. And hagiography, by the way, is just the study of saints' lives. There's a huge corpus of literature devoted to, sort of biographical treatment of saints over the years.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get into hagiography, you're not necessarily dealing with historical documents. You're dealing with documents that are certainly culturally relative and traditionally relative, but not necessarily history. But in terms of certain saints in the history of especially the Catholic Church, you do have examples like Brede where there does seem to be some very more obvious overlay, basically dressing up a deity in Christian dress.
So there's a distinction there then between doing that and say, okay, we've got this pagan holiday that's typically celebrated on such and such a date, but today instead we are going to celebrate a Christian, some aspect of our Christian faith. That's a different kettle of fish, to borrow a phrase. Let me ask you this question. Those who don't feel comfortable with some of the traditions that have grown up around the Christian holiday, or around the Christmas holiday, that is, that don't have anything to do really with Jesus or celebrating him, commercialization for one, other things like, Santa Claus. What about those? I mean, is there a problem with Christians saying, look, I'm going to ignore the whole holiday because there's just too much cultural baggage that has nothing to do with our Lord and Savior?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I don't have anything necessarily against that. I mean, it comes down, that's a choice that people have to make individually. That's between them and the Lord. If the Lord convicts them to do that, then absolutely. And certainly we don't want people to make decisions like that against their conscience. But I see nothing wrong with that. Every person has to make their own decision. But by the same token, personages like Santa Claus, if you look at Santa Claus, he's really kind of an amalgam of different cultural elements. And some of them are more overtly pagan than others. And I think the Father Christmas elements from the Celtic traditions and the Western traditions, play on the imagery. But there actually was a historical St. Nicholas. He was an early church father, a bishop from Turkey, and he actually attended the Council of Nicaea. And for all we know, he was on the the committee that basically helped to canonize the scriptures, to produce the 50 books that Constantine had requested of some of the bishops in the council. And he, according to tradition, he was very concerned about the welfare of children, and so some of these ideas about Santa Claus are actually not only rooted in historical truths and culture, but they're Christian in nature. Nicholas was a churchman. He was a bishop, the leader of a Christian community, and again, as I said, we have the records. He was in attendance at the Council of Nicaea, so he was a very significant personage in the procession of the history of the church. There's an interesting story about. It's kind of a footnote to Santa Claus, but there's an interesting story about Saint Nicholas. One of the main reasons that the Council of Nicaea was called to begin with was to deal with this heretic from Egypt named Arius.
Right.
And I think it was either Lactantius or I think it was Lactantius that wrote about this. He said that Nicholas got so angry, he got so fed up and flustered with Arius that he struck him.
In Christian love, no doubt.
In Christian love, no doubt. Most scholars think of this as apocalyptic. They're not apocryphal in terms of its historicity, because only the bishops were invited to the council. Arius, ostensibly could have been waiting out in the hallway or something, and that little scuffle could have happened. But my favorite holiday meme over the last couple of years has been this picture of Nicholas and Arius, and the title was "I've come to talk theology and to beat up heretics, and I'm all done talking about theology."
Well, that's two references to the movie. The Roddy Piper movie. What is the film now? I don't know why the title's escaping me, because I made a joke about it in the first segment with Dr. Tim Furnish. There are people out there screaming the title even as we speak. Well, we'll get it here in a minute.
Right.
Well, I agree with you. Romans 14. Paul, in his letter to the church at Rome, wrote, "One person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats in honor of the Lord, and he gives thanks to God, while the one who abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God." It's Romans 14, verses 5 and 6. So, I think that you are correct. Somebody who just feels convicted that this holiday has just become too commercial, too secular, too pagan. I mean, some of the divas in pop music who put out a Christmas album every year, and based on their lifestyle and the stories that appear in the press, really don't have a firm grasp of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Many of the Christmas things. I mean, go to a store and try to find a Christmas card that actually refers to Christ instead of reindeer, candy canes, snowmen, and Santa Claus, and you might be there a while. But so I can understand why people would want to distance themselves from that. But then taking it a step farther and saying that if you are celebrating Christmas and wishing people Merry Christmas, or putting up a Christmas tree in your home, which we have done. Sharon puts it up usually right after Halloween.
Sure. Wow, that's early.
Well, it's beautiful, and it love the way it sets off the house. So, but the people who do that are somehow inadvertently worshiping a pagan deity. And again, I'm going to link to an article that I posted at my website, as well as that academic paper on the origin of December 25th as the day that we celebrate Christmas.
Well, it was actually, if we're to believe our records, it was none other than Martin Luther who actually was the first churchman to actually put candles in an evergreen tree at that time of the year. So, people can make the argument about the Yule log, that the pagans, would bring in evergreens and throw an evergreen log on the fire. But there's the Germanic tradition, the Tannenbaum seems to me to be more Luther than, Odin or Thor.
Yeah. But taking it back further to claim that this is somehow connected to Nimrod and Semiramis is just historically inaccurate. It's a misunderstanding of the ancient Mesopotamian icon, artwork.
Right, and I think the connection that's usually made there was something that the explorer's name, cartographer's name was Nabier, who did some of the first work on a site which would have been in northern Syria that he dubbed Nimrod, but the actual name of the place was called Kulu or Kala in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And the plate that you've probably seen before, and a lot of people have probably seen before, is from the Ashurbanipal library, and it's one of the Apkalu,
Right.
Holding a deer in one hand and a piece of foliage in the left hand.
Possibly.
And what I've seen is a lot of people that make the connection between, first of all, they and I'm broaching this very lightly, not accusatory, but the mistake made here is to identify this Apkalu as Nimrod to begin with.
Right.
The deer that he's holding is not a reindeer either. Mm-hmm. It's the Persian fallow deer, which is a large species of deer that's actually becoming more increasingly rare in these times. And I've also seen people identify the foliage in his left hand as a mistletoe. But it's actually a piece of palm. And so again, here's an example of fully fleshing out, the provenience here, the cultural context of this particular plate. Now, obviously, we're dealing with an Apkalu here, which is very relevant, to the study of what you and I and Heiser and many others have been involved in. These Apkalu spirits play, they have an identity in the biblical narrative, as we know, and unfortunately, we don't have time to get into that.
Right.
But it's in my estimation as a historian, it's a clear mistake to make the connection between this plate, first of all, as Nimrod and Nimrod and Santa Claus. It just doesn't make any historical cultural sense to do that.
We just got a few minutes left, Judd. Let me ask one final question then. With these claims that we are somehow inadvertently or accidentally directing our worship to a pagan deity, even if these connections were accurate, which they are not, but even if they were, is it even possible to accidentally worship a pagan deity if you are approaching the Christmas holiday from a spirit of honoring and glorifying the Creator God of the Bible made flesh? Can God make that mistake and misunderstand our intentions that badly?
Emphatically, no. I don't think there's any theological ground to stand on there. Even with some of the cultural baggage. I mean, if your attention is focused on Christ, on God, how can you accidentally worship a pagan deity? They just seem anathema to one another, counter to one another, in my estimation.
Agreed. And again, this is no requirement that if you, listener, are convicted that this holiday is just too commercial, too secular to celebrate the holiday. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's how you are convicted by the Holy Spirit, then that is what you must do. But on the other hand, if this season fills you with joy and gives us an opportunity to share the love and the hope that we have in Jesus Christ, then there is no guilt in that either. Again, I will put links to the articles that I've mentioned here during this all too brief interview in the notes at VFTB.net or wherever else you're finding the program. Dr. Judd Burton, historian, anthropologist, archaeologist. You'll find him online at burtonbeyond.com. Judd, a Merry Christmas to you, brother, and our prayers for a happy and healthy New Year.
Yes, same to you. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
All right, hang on the line for just a moment. This is A View from the Bunker, which, as we remind you, is available at Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, wherever else fine podcasts are sold. We appreciate you giving us a like at our View from the Bunker page on Facebook. VFTB is a production of Gilbert House, released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our opening theme is Iron Bacon by Kevin MacLeod. His website is incompetech.com, and our announcer is DC Good. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, and we leave you now with Vessels of Mercy, Nathaniel and Natalie Howdeshell, and a beautiful rendition of O Come, Emmanuel. A Merry Christmas to you. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.